guys, welcome back to another episode of Chats on the Blog Cabin. The show where I invite people virtually into the blog cabin to chat about life. And today we're chatting all about audio storytelling. And we're chatting with Evan. Evan is a host and creator of Vanishing Postcards, which was named one of the best podcasts of 2021 by Digital Trends. So thank you, Evan, for coming on the show. And before we start chatting about your podcast, tell us a little about yourself.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a great pleasure to sit down with you here at the Blog Cabin. So yes, I'm talking to you today from New York City. So if you hear some sirens outside, I mean, that's just part of the way that's part of the way of life up here. But I've lived in New York long enough. I've earned the right to call myself a New Yorker for whenever I'm in the mood to do so. That said, I am also one of a proud few who can claim to have been born and bred in the city of Austin, Texas. I go back in Texas for many generations. So I will always, I am a proud Texan. I'll probably die in Texas. So I like to think of myself as bicultural. I get to borrow a little bit of the best of both worlds. The reason for my move up here to New York was pretty simple. I'm an actor. Figured this was the place to go for that. Came up here for school, ended up staying. I've been fortunate enough to perform on a lot of really great stages here in the city. But as we discussed at the beginning, my latest endeavor is a podcast called Vanishing Postcards. If I were to describe the series, it's the product of a 1,500-mile Texas road trip. And through the series, listeners are really invited to join me on a journey exploring the hidden dives, traditions, and frequently threatened histories you'll discover by exiting the interstates. In many ways, it's kind of a 180 from a lot of the work I was doing up until this point. I think had you told me a number of years ago that I'd be working on a podcast and devoting so much of my time and energy to this, I'd say, what are you talking about? But at the same time, I think that everything I've done up until this point has really kind of prepared me beautifully for this journey. At the same time, I think when I look at the body of my work as a whole, this is probably the best work I've ever created. It's been a really rewarding journey. And as I embarked on so much of this adventure as a solo traveler, I'm really grateful that it's now out there in the world. And I feel like I can now invite people to join me and experience some of the great things I got to do along the way.
I love that. When you started talking about the little towns outside the interstate, I kept thinking about the movie Cars, because that was basically based on, them going out and finding that little town. So that's the first thing that popped in my mind when you talked about that.
Well, I haven't seen the movie Cars yet, but it's actually on my to-do list concerning, because I'm interested in expanding the map beyond Texas for season 2. And I know that Route 66 was integral to the movie Cars, and Route 66 just might be on my horizon.
So let's talk about how did you come up with the idea of doing this podcast? Because that's not something that you see a lot of people do.
Well, yeah, and it was it wasn't as if I got like this lightning bolt of inspiration and this kind of like, idea just, came to me. It was a slow evolution. I mean, like so many people over the last 10 years, I'm someone who's just absolutely fallen in love with podcasts and the medium of audio storytelling. I really think that the gateway drug for me in a lot of ways was the program The Moth. I mean, that's just a show where people get up and they tell personal stories without notes. You maybe start listening to that while you're doing some cooking or chores around the house, and you discover other podcasts along the way. I'm a great fan there of the Kitchen Sisters. They go around the country collecting oral histories, which are just fantastic. You Must Remember This. That's a terrific podcast about classic Hollywood. There's one called Cocaine and Rhinestones. It's all about the history of country music. Around this time too, the YouTube algorithm kept suggesting travel videos. And I never really, I would always watch them, but I never really quite felt like I saw the way that I like to travel represented in a lot of them. Certainly not the case with all, but I think with a lot of travel vloggers nowadays, you'll find that it's a lot less about the place and much more about look at me and how cute I am in this place. And I just kind of started, hearing these whispers that, maybe I could try my hand at doing something with this all. And so in January of 2020, I grabbed a microphone. I went back home to Texas just to kind of see what I could collect as part of an experiment. It wasn't necessarily like I embarked to do a series. I mean, it very well could have ended up in disaster, but I did have a few ideas for stories that I was interested and curious to see about getting. But I found that I ended up in a groove and alignment with this pretty early on. And the project revealed itself to me as Vanishing Postcards. I mean, I didn't have a title or anything totally clear when I started going. But the reason that I titled the series Vanishing Postcards is because I took a step back and I realized that each episode I have is a snapshot of a different place. And what is that? That's a past postcard. And if there is a common thread that all of the places have in common, it's that you don't know how much longer a lot of them are going to be around. They're really representative of broader cultural histories, threatened traditions, and it's really about exploring all of that.
So tell us how you record these episodes, because it seems like you have to be on the road to pretty much record them, right?
Yes, well, yes, absolutely. And it's been interesting because I did start, I started to work on this project before the pandemic hit. And back then I could really just walk into a bar or a restaurant or whatever and just start talking to people. And that's the first several episodes that you will hear. That's really exactly what it is. I mean, most people had no idea that I was going to show up. And I didn't do that to ambush anyone. It was just, I found it was better, as opposed to like getting on the call, getting on a phone and saying, hey, is it okay if I stop by to talk to you? It was better if I show up at these places first, order a beer, just start talking, explain myself, then pull out the microphone. That changed a bit. So yes, it really is just me and my microphone and my software. That's it. COVID absolutely changed a lot of what I could do. I definitely was very cognizant about precautions. You had to tell people in advance. It also changed a lot of the places that I could go to. So many of the places I was initially going to were understandably closed because of the pandemic altogether. So I did have to call in advance, tell people that I was going to show up. And, maybe there were fewer people interviewed, but at the same time, because of that, I had to do a lot more in the way of pre-research. And I think you'll find as the series progresses, listeners get to know the subjects a bit more intimately. And I think there's also just greater diversity in terms of subject and location explored as the season progresses.
So let's talk about the diversity and the subjects that you explore on your podcast, because I think that's great.
Sure. So as I said, I ended up covering about 1,500 miles worth of Texas, and I think that each episode really informs the other. Again, it wasn't like I had I knew everything that I was going to do in advance. Not at all. Basically, I would take a look, and for instance, my first episode was on a dive bar. After that, I did an episode on a dance hall. And then I thought to myself, well, so what's a honky tonk? What is the difference between a dance hall and a honky tonk? And so I found a honky tonk so that I could get into that. Then, I wanted to explore some, I wanted to make certain that there was good cultural diversity in the season as well. The border is a place that we hear a lot about in the news, but what's often lost in that noise is just the incredible culture and the remarkable people that exist down there. And so I knew that I wanted to do a piece on conjunto, which is the incredible music that exists down there. That basically, in the early 20th centuries, the Mexican laborers heard the polkas that were brought to Texas by the Germans and the Czechs, and they took those melodies and they gave their Spanish lyrics to them. And I went to a town called San Benito, Texas, which is about 18 miles north of the border, which really was the birthplace of conjunto. And I met this family whose recently deceased patriarch had built this entire museum dedicated to conjunto. And so I have that represented. While I was down there, I heard that there was a terrific place for barbacoa. Barbacoa is a traditional Mexican, it's Mexican barbecue, but this guy who's cooking it is the only guy who's legally allowed to cook barbacoa as it was meant, meaning he's cooking it out of a pit in the ground in what had been the backyard of his childhood home. And so, you look at stuff like this and then you think, okay, well, maybe we need something funny right now. Let's see what kind of quirky characters we can find. I have pieces on country stores. I have a piece that was Central Texas is known for, right now, basically, Central Texas is experiencing kind of like this explosion of wineries. But what that land is historically great for, and historically known for, are peaches. And peaches are getting harder to find. Not everyone is coming in. People are coming in to start wineries, but no one is coming in to start peach orchards. And so I found some of the old peach growing families to speak with. And that's really just kind of how everything evolved. I would say, is there a region that I need to focus on? Let's go to Galveston and get some seaside culture. And that's really how everything evolved.
So how did you go about finding these places? Just word of mouth, basically?
Word of mouth. I mean, a lot of, internet, Google rabbit hole. I mean, the internet certainly makes this much easier than it would have been back in the day. But yes, I mean, really, it was just kind of thinking about what I was interested and just looking to see what might be out there. There were some instances where, I had ideas for, certain pieces I'd like to do. Then you discover, well, that would have been good, but 2 weeks ago that man died. It was so a lot of stuff like that happened as I was figuring this all out. And you'd read about these places. Turns out, nope, they closed just a few months ago. But it was a great adventure.
Wow. And I really want to hear more about the adventures that you went on, but right now we need to take a brief commercial break.
You got it.
Hi, I'm Stratton Leopold from Leopold's Ice Cream in Savannah, Georgia. 11 years ago, we started the I Pledge Project, giving children who can recite the Pledge of Allegiance from memory a free scoop of ice cream. So join us. Over 200 shops across the country have over the last 11 years. Join us in July, National Ice Cream Month, and Independence Day for iPledgeForIceCream.com.
And we are back. Speaking of ice cream, have you ever interviewed anybody that's related to ice cream?
I don't think so. I love ice cream, though. Who doesn't?
Yeah. So let's talk about what you got from going to all these places and learning people's story. How has that changed you?
I mean, people often ask me if I encountered much in the way of resistance. And sure, I mean, you get occasional no's here and there, but for the most part, I found that people really were eager to share their stories, and they were greatly honored by the fact that someone had taken an interest to, just kind of go learn about what these places were about, learn about their histories, traditions. I think that so much of this series is kind of meant in protest of maybe a little bit of Instagram tourism. The places that I'm going to are really, you're not going to be reading about them in glossy magazines. And I think that's important because often when we think about art and culture, we immediately think about palaces of civilization like the Met in New York City, the British Museum, the Louvre, the Prado. But art and culture is everywhere. And what's more, some of the best you will discover, are coming out of places that get the least amount of attention. Clarksdale, Mississippi gave us the blues. Detroit gave us Motown. And I think that's really something that's important to remember. And especially right now, I mean, we're dealing with we're living through a very perilous, polarized, divided moment. But I think right now, when you look at the world, art and culture is one of the rare areas of agreement. It provides an avenue for a shared experience. And it's really, this series is all about celebrating just that. And conversely, I mean, if we can't honor, celebrate, and recognize what is beautiful about our small towns and rural communities, how can we expect them to appreciate what is good and beautiful about places like New York and San Francisco and Austin and whatnot?
Yeah, that is so true. And a lot of times it's the local people that know the best places to go. And even though, like you said, the dive bars and someplace hole in the wall places, like, for instance, my husband's a native of Mexico. So the hole in the wall places are actually the best places that you can get authentic Mexican food.
Absolutely. And you'll discover when you go to these places that it's just, you're going to find a community that exists in these places that you're just not going to find at your typical chain. You just aren't. You will find that you will get welcomed in these places, and people are eager to tell you about what you can see and do that you're just not going to, that aren't easily found, but are just hidden treasures.
So how long did it take you to do your season 1? Did you go multiple trips to Texas, or did you do it all in pretty much one city?
So it's a very interesting story. Basically what happened is I started, playing around as kind of an experiment. January, February, I, knocked about 6 episodes out. And I, was really pleased with what I got. I knew that I wanted to continue. I came back to New York, and I left town on March 8th of 2020 for what was to have been a 10-day family vacation to Mexico. And during that time, COVID hit, realized, well, probably not the best idea to come back to New York. So I ended up making a detour to Texas. I was twiddling my thumbs for a little while there. Miraculously, through serendipity, the series initially got picked up by a network that requested 16 episodes. So I set about fulfilling that episode order over the summer during the pandemic, which was, certainly interesting and challenging in and of itself. As is often the case in business, that deal ultimately didn't come to fruition. But I definitely feel as if the circumstances of the pandemic enabled me to, devote so much of my energy to this product. In many ways, the project is a product of the pandemic. So I assembled it. I would kind of do it in chunks. I would hit the road for a few weeks at a time, and then, take a break. Assemble my materials, figure out what else was needed, and then, I'd go on. And it just took me a long time, as I have released independently. It really just, I think what took me longer than anything else was, just kind of learning how, getting good strategies in place in terms of independent release and everything. Probably, it would get easier and easier for me to put these episodes together. If I were to estimate, maybe each episode takes like about 10 days. That's just kind of like a ballpark estimate, I'd say.
So does your episode just focus on one particular town, one particular person in the town, or like the whole thing that the town can offer our surrounding communities?
Well, no, they vary. The episodes vary. And really, I do try to get as specific as I can. Basically, for instance, the first episode is about this dive bar in Austin called the Dry Creek Cafe. It was opened in 1952 when it was basically beyond the edge of town. It was countryside. You go there now, it's a dilapidated shack that is now surrounded by mansions. It was initially built for cedar choppers who were an Appalachian subculture that migrated down to Central Texas. And so I really kind of used this bar as a way to explore the layers of history that people are often unaware of. I used it as an opportunity to. I spoke to a man who wrote a book about the cedar choppers. Then the other layer of history is that it became a big hangout for the hippies in the 60s and 70s, which provided an opportunity to explore Austin's rich musical history. I interviewed a terrific local legend of a musician by the name of Bobby Earl Smith, who wrote a song all about the place. I talked to the bartender there, Angel, who, as I said, the place opened in 1952 or 53. She's only the third. She was only, at the time that I spoke with her, she was only the third bartender to ever work there.
Wow.
So it's really kind of more than anything, I'm looking at specific places in the towns and the broader histories that they represent. But every episode is certainly different. There are some, for instance, I have a piece coming out on country stores where I went to 2 different country stores on opposite ends of Central Texas and got very different stories and histories from both of those places. I did another one, I referenced the barbacoa earlier, but I paired that with so I talk about barbacoa in Brownsville versus, the Tex-Mex puffy tacos you'll find in San Antonio. But so that's, it definitely varies, but I wouldn't, I would hesitate to call it a travel series. This is much more of a people series that is the product of my travels.
I love that, because a lot of times people only focus on things that are flashy, shiny, brand new, things that look good in pictures, and not the stories behind all this. I love antique stuff, and I love going to older homes and older places. Whereas my husband's like, no, I'd rather not even try that right now, except unless it's Mexican food, then he'll try it.
Well, I'm with him on that one, believe me.
So how did you get to be number one, named one of the best podcasts of 2021 by Digital Trends? Because that's pretty awesome.
Well, they liked what they heard. It was just simple. I don't think there was anything special about it. I found, I did some research on who's reviewing podcasts and whatnot, and I submitted, and they chose it. But since then, I've been blessed to receive a lot of excellent press as well in publications like the Austin American Statesman, Dallas Morning News. The Bellow Collective is a wonderful resource for independent podcasters. I received some wonderful mentions in their newsletter, in addition to a few other sources. Austin's NPR affiliate KUT recently did a good piece on it, and it's all of that is really just kind of about hustle and just approaching press and whatnot. But I think it's an interesting story. I do like to think it is quality work that people are responding to.
Yeah, probably so. Plus, I think it's also work that it could be anybody and everybody that you're talking to. It doesn't have to be someone that's super rich that you're talking to. It's be the person off the street.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I absolutely, the themes of the series are universal. Change is going on everywhere, be it in Texas, be it in New York, North Carolina, California, London, Morocco, Mexico, wherever. Change is everywhere. And I don't think that change is something to be feared in the least. In many ways, I think that change is something to be embraced, but I think it's important to grow and change responsibly. In the case of my hometown of Austin, it's changed immeasurably since I was a kid. It's a completely different city, but people are still moving there. We have to ask, why are people still moving there? What is it that they like about the place? And a lot of that is the culture. And I think it's important that we do more to protect the culture that surrounds us, be it in North Carolina, New York, Texas, wherever, because we don't want to have a monolithic culture at the end of the day.
That is so true. So what has the show taught you about yourself?
Well, no one is ever truly prepared for anything. Again, it's like when I, first started educating myself about podcasting and audio production, I thought, oh, gosh, I'm going to have to find someone else to do this. I can't do this. I don't come from any kind of a technical background. But you get to work and you're like, no, if you want to do this right, you're going to have to learn how to do this. And you're going to have to teach yourself. And I think if you just kind of set to work, it's amazing what you can do and what you can accomplish. I was speaking with someone else a few weeks ago, just talking about how I was going up and approaching people, talking to people, all of this. And she said, well, where does your confidence come from? Where do you get that? And I had to say, well, I actually think that confidence is overrated. Because with all of these interviews that I do, I can assure you, I am way more nervous and uncomfortable than any of the people I am speaking with. I always want to make certain that I'm phrasing my questions in a respectful way. I'm always thinking about everything that has to be done. And if there is confidence, it is a byproduct of the experience. The more you work, the better you're going to get. But when you start off, you can expect to make mistakes and get messy. But in the end, you're going to be stronger and better as a result of all of that.
I love what you said, that you have to make sure that you're phrasing things in the right way, because the internet trolls are out there and they can just easily cancel you like that. So I love that you really do. You have to put a lot of thought in what you're going to say, and you have to be a great listener as well to host a podcast.
Oh, 100%. And people often ask me too. I mean, they're always impressed by the stories that I have captured, and they say, what is your secret? What is your magic? And they're really, you cannot manufacture magic. You can't. But what you can do is you can establish trust. You can approach people with respect, empathy. You can listen. And then on top of that, though, you do have to ask specific questions. I would never just go up to someone and say, can you tell me about yourself? I would maybe say, can you maybe describe for me your childhood home? And you'd be amazed at what you can get as a result of just asking something like that.
So when you start with these interviews, like you said, a lot of people you were like going up to and just talking to them. How do they respond in the first place? So they're like, this is a strange guy talking to me, I don't want any part of it? Or was it like, oh yeah, they really wanted to have a chat and talk?
Well, I mean, every person is different. Every person is going to respond differently. And it was never like I would just go up to someone immediately with a microphone and be like, hey, you're good to talk. I would always introduce myself first, tell them about what I was doing and ask if I could ask a few questions. But usually because I'm really kind of asking, more questions about, the places where I am or their personal stories connected to that place. And obviously, personal stories do emerge, but by starting, focused in that direction, I think people were much more receptive to, opening up. It's not like it's not like they're sitting down in front of Barbara Walters or something. I'm asking them about, why their marriage went south or something to that effect,
So have you ever had anybody refuse to not want to talk to you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and so as I said, I did a piece on a honky tonk. I went to this place in this town called Bandera, Texas, called Arky Blues Silver Dollar. It's like the oldest continuously operating honky tonk in Texas. It's owned by a guy named Arky Blue. He's a country singer songwriter. He performs there every Saturday night. He's in his 80s now. I thought, oh man, I got to talk to Arky. Got to talk to Arky. Arky did not want to have a thing to do with this. He was perfectly cordial, but he just did not have and when he refused to allow me to record him. When I did talk to him, he would not give an inch, but everyone around him really wanted to talk. They had all sorts of stories that they wanted to share. And in the end, his refusal became part of the story in and of itself. And that piece really, you still get a really great portrait of Arky that in some ways I think is more fun and better than it would have been, had I gotten the chance to speak with him. And I kind of had to remind myself, one of my favorite pieces of new journalism is there's a terrific essay that the journalist Gay Talese wrote for Esquire magazine in 1965 called Frank Sinatra Has a Cold. He was assigned with the task of interviewing Frank Sinatra. Sinatra refused to talk to him at all. But what he did instead is he interviewed everyone in Sinatra's entourage, all of the hangers-ons, and it's probably the greatest portrait that has ever been written of Frank Sinatra. It's the real Frank Sinatra is revealed through that portrait. In no way am I comparing myself to Gay Talese, but I think that's an important story for people to remember if they find themselves in a position like that.
Yeah, that's true. And I love the fact that you said the real Frank Sinatra. You're showing people the real and the real people, not the fake TV stars or fake storylines that a lot of people put out. You're showing the real heart of America and what America was built on.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it's a beautiful culture that's worth celebrating.
Yeah. So what are your plans? You already said that you were thinking maybe doing Route 66, but are your plans of branching out from Texas to other places?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that, my goal is definitely to expand the map beyond Texas. I would love nothing more than to drive Route 66 from Oklahoma to California. And that's something that I'm working on making happen this fall. I'm really working on that. In addition to that as well, I would love nothing more than to take a trip to Mississippi. Mississippi is America's Ireland in many ways. They have a remarkable storytelling tradition. If you look at the canon of American writers, some of the greatest, William Faulkner, Richard Wright, Eudora Welty, Tennessee Williams, all came from Mississippi, and I would love to explore that. Mississippi is also a place where the history is always invading the present, sometimes in really ugly ways, and I'd be curious to explore that. Certainly this could be done in New York too, or internationally as well. And I would love. It is my goal to find a way to continue moving forward with this.
So it's just you doing all this?
It is just me at this point. It is just me. It's and again, it's. I just discovered that was really kind of the easiest way to do it. I don't think that it's not because I'm a control freak or anything like that. It's just in order to get the storytelling right, in order for it to, it's the most efficient way that I can work on it at this point. As it evolves, maybe that will change. But it's really the best way I can work on it right now.
So are you still acting as well or no? Or what's your full-time project?
No, I mean, look, if an audition comes along, I'll take it. And I've had auditions, here and there throughout. But, I think at the core of everything that I do, I mean, I am a storyteller by nature. And this is another way of storytelling that I'm really having a great time pursuing and exploring.
So do you think you'll ever interweave the storytelling of the podcast into acting, like kind of like interweave and talk to actors as well about their trips and travels?
You never know. I mean, I'm interested in talking to people who are good storytellers and good talkers. So if those people happen to be actors, great. I mean, I won't take anything off the table, but it has to ultimately, whomever I choose to speak to, they have to serve the story that I want to tell. If the story that I want to tell that I feel needs to be told involves them, great. If not, I mean, I don't see myself, seeking out, celebrities unless I think they can serve like a really great purpose or need. There may be some. I mean, certainly there are a number of artists that have had relationships to certain places that I would love to talk to and include. But, it's not a prerequisite.
I also, while you were talking, I was thinking about maybe you taking these particular episodes and forming it into like little snippets for a play.
Yeah, one project at a time. one project at a time.
But it would play itself out perfectly for different acts, especially if you're talking about the state of Texas or things like that.
Well, and it could, it very well could be a, documentary TV series as well. I mean, there are plenty of possibilities, but right now I am focused on just putting together the best podcast that I can, that people want to listen to, and are going to have fun listening to and telling other people about.
Now, you mentioned earlier that someone picked up, wanted you to do 6 episodes. Let's talk about that.
60? No, it was initially picked up by a network.
Okay.
Is what happened, and they requested 16 episodes. I was able to fulfill 15. Then that deal fell apart. A lot of it had to do with just the reality of the advertising economy in relation to the pandemic. Which is out of all of our hands. So obviously it was a disappointment, but you move forward, and that's exactly what I'm doing.
So let's talk about what you're doing now. I don't want to say after COVID, because COVID's still not gone, but how are you moving forward?
Well, I mean, my biggest, I've focused on growth more than anything else. So, I'm constantly just finding, other people that I can, places where I can get the word out in regard to, sharing ad space with other podcasts, in regard to getting press. I'm just working hard constantly just to make certain that, there's momentum building with this. I am doing research for season 2, definitely.
So how do you get the marketing because you said you're all by yourself. How do you get the marketing for all your podcast, for the marketing for your podcast, for people to either be on other people's podcast or for just basically getting out to let people hear what you're saying?
Well, I mean, I think a very effective way to grow is just by meeting other podcasters. I work hard to find other shows that I feel are in the same neighborhood as mine, is what I like to say. Podcasts that have Texas settings, or podcasts that have an interest in travel, podcasts that have an interest in storytelling. I do my best just to introduce myself, and really it's like, so listen, I really think that my listeners, would have great interest in what you're doing. Could we arrange an ad swap? Mm-hmm. And so that's really a very important strategy. Also speaking with people like you helps, and then earned media as well, in terms of news coverage too, is very valuable. So it's really kind of, although those are kind of the big moving parts.
Wow. So what was your most memorable interviews? You've already talked about several, but what's one that just sticks out in your mind that you just cannot believe that you even were able to get this person to talk to you?
Oh, well, I mean, there are so many. I mean, there were some really terrific, wild, over the top characters. You'll hear, there's a guy in, an episode I have coming out at the end of the month who, showed me his stuffed rooster, and trust me, that has a whole other story attached to it that I can't get into right now. There was there was a guy that I met at Archie Blue Silver Dollar, Hoot Gibson, who I just sat down, started talking to him. Turned out he was a poet, and he got a whole bonus episode based on his poetry. But one guy I always come back to is, this piece I did. I did a piece on this dance hall called Sefshik Hall, which I had never been to before. I really hadn't heard of it until about 3 days before I went up there. When people, there are many dance halls in Texas, but I feel like the ones that always get the coverage are Green Hall and Lukenbach. Those are the dance halls that everybody always goes to, but there are many more. And Sefshik Hall is in a small town called Seaton, Texas. It has a population of about 40. It's outside a larger town called Temple. It's about an hour outside of Austin. But it is now, by most accounts, the oldest continuously operating family-run dance hall in Texas. It's the Shulock family. They run this place. It was opened, by the family back in the early 1920s. It was almost 100 years ago. And I went there to do a piece on this place, and it's also the only dance hall that I've been to where the dance floor is on the second level, and you have to walk up this rickety staircase, and it really is very much like stepping back in time. But I enter the dance hall, and I, of course, look conspicuous because, I have my earphones, I have my microphone, and this older gentleman comes up to me. He's like, what do you have there? He's wearing a Stetson, bolo tie, tan suit, boots.
Mhm.
I start talking to him. Turns out he's just about 3 months shy of his 100th birthday. Turns out I start talking to him. Turned out he was a Normandy veteran. He remembered, his brother got married at the dance hall when he was 17. He was the best man. He told me that he, lost his wife, 4 years ago, and that when she died, he didn't know what he was going to do, didn't go anywhere. But his niece said, "Come on, we're going to go dancing at Tom Sefcik." And he said, "I haven't been dancing in years." And she said, "No, it'll come back to you." And he proudly told me that now he goes there every Sunday. One night he said he recently had danced with 32 different women. He sadly, understandably, because of COVID, he wasn't able to celebrate his 100th birthday at the hall, which is what his plan had been. But after the episode came out, some people reached out to me and they said that his neighbors honored his 100th birthday by staging a drive-by parade. And that he planned to celebrate his 101st birthday at the hall this year, which would have been in May, and I believe he did.
Wow, that is so cool that you would sit down and have that conversation, and 100 years old or close to 100 years old, and dance with 32 women in one night. Wow, I wish I had that much energy.
No, he was a great Johnny Pulshek, a great man.
Wow. So we're almost out of time. Is there one last thing that you want to leave us with?
Well, I mean, as I said, I think that I talked about this earlier, but I'll talk about it again. Culture is around us. Everyone has a culture, and culture is beautiful and worth celebrating. And look, if you start digging and looking in your own backyard, you will be amazed to discover the beauty and the layers of history that surround you. It's really important. We can't discount any place because every place has a story, and you'll be amazed at what beauty can be unlocked that's sometimes hidden in plain sight.
And tell us the name of your podcast again.
So again, it's Vanishing Postcards. I mean, I'm talking on a podcast right now. So if you're listening to this podcast, I'm quite confident you'll be able to find us. Search for Vanishing Postcard, Apple, Spotify, Google, all the usual suspects. You'll find us there. But you can also find the show on vanishingpostcards.com. And if you want some companion pictures that you can see that correspond with the series, you can go to Instagram. Just find Vanishing Postcards on Instagram as well. I keep that account pretty active, and you can get in touch with me there if you feel the need to reach out for any reason.
Oh, I love that. The fact that you're using the Instagram, the social media, to the coordinating pictures. I love that.
Mm-hmm. Sure thing.
So, Evan, I want to thank you so much for being on Chats from the Blog Cabin. I mean, it's been a joy, and I can't wait to see what you're up to next.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I'm greatly honored. It's a pleasure to talk to North Carolina. In fact, if I have to cite an inspiration for this, it would be a North Carolinian by the name of Charles Kuralt, who traveled the country for many years. He had a television program called On the Road. And I often find myself asking, what would Charles Kuralt do as I work on this series? And so he's the North Carolina inspiration that filters into Vanishing Postcards.
I love that. And he was such a great man. Great North Carolinian, too.
Absolutely.
So, guys, I will drop all the links where you can find Evan's podcast, Vanishing Postcards, in the show notes. And as always, be blessed. And remember, keep chatting.